and put it on the pulpit. And he asked his mom, what does that mean when the pastor does that? And her answer was, not a thing. But anyway, as I was preparing this, it looked more and more like it was going to be a two-part message. So I think it will be. While we sometimes joke about this being a stereotypical mental health question, where somebody comes into the psychologist or counseling office, or they say, I don't know who I am. What I want to do is say, well, do you have any ID on you? Because
Sure.
that would be a good place to start. Okay, and but there's another question that goes with that question. That has both a mental health and a moral spiritual implication. And that is, well, I may know who I am, but I don't particularly like who I am. So I know who I am. I think I should change. How do I do that? And for many of you, this has happened throughout your life. You go to a social gathering and you ask somebody, who they are. You go up and you greet them, you meet them, and you usually use a variation of, tell me something about yourself. And I tell people that when you ask about people and sincerely want to learn who they are from them and what's important to them and what matters to them, they'll think you're such a wonderful conversationalist. Because you're asking them to talk about the most important person in the world to them, themselves. You may remember the story of the rather self-centered novelist who had just written his first novel, and he was at a cocktail party, and he was telling someone about his novel and what hard work it was and how proud he was of it, and then he stopped and he caught himself and said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm talking about me. Enough about me. What did you think of my novel? But usually when people ask us, or when we ask somebody else to tell us, to introduce themselves to us, their initial response is usually, if it's a male, it's usually something related to education. Who I am. I'm a teacher. Or I'm a boat captain. Some of the guys I played baseball with, charter boat captains up in Maine and Massachusetts. I'm a musician. Or they sometimes say, with a mix of joy and confusion, I am retired. And it's interesting, see, don't forget that, particularly for males, for hundreds of years, a surname often identified the original family occupation. A miller. Well, the family had a mill, worked in a mill, owned a mill. A baker, a tailor, smith, I'd always thought had to do with being a blacksmith or a silversmith or a coppersmith. But in doing some research, I found out that the term came from being a soldier, a warrior smith, because the soldiers wore armor. And so they were soldier, warrior, smiths. My friend Pam Houseknecht, her name means house servant. So you can see a lot of our names have to do, you go back historically, they have to do with occupation. And that's particularly, I think, attached itself to males who I am, let me tell you about my occupation. That's who I am. With females, they tend to answer that question, at least in the past. With more and more women entering the workforce, you don't get this quite as much. But in the past, with women, you would say, tell me about yourself. And they would tell you about their roles. And they identified themselves with their roles. I'm a wife. I'm a mother. I'm a daughter. I'm a housewife, which is strange when you think about being married to your house. But women have tended over the years to identify themselves, to answer the who am I question. Sorry, Rich. I hope it's a Timex.
It's already broken. It is a Timex.
They've tended to answer that who am I question, not with occupation, but with their role. Who am I is really a very basic, important, and ongoing question that we ask, even if we don't always ask it consciously. It's there. We become who we are. Our identity is first shaped through what psychologists call mirroring. You aren't who you think you are. You aren't who others think you are. You are who you think others think you are. So we see ourselves in the eyes of our first caregivers. And that's how we get this sense of personal identity. I am who I am, or I am valued or loved because I see in your eyes that you value me or love me. This is where we first begin to see ourselves as who we are. We can see ourselves in this way. I am loved, I am safe, I am protected, I am good. Or, through our interactions with our caregivers, we can see ourselves, I am not loved. I don't matter. I am alone in the world. I am no good. It isn't that we are told these things as much as we interpret the messages given us by thousands of verbal and visual and emotional clues, cues, and interactions with our primary caregivers over the first few years of our lives. I become who I believe I am in the eyes of my caregivers. Then these messages about us become the messages in us that create our self-image, our self-definition. But always note, it's not enough for a child to be loved and wanted. A child has to feel loved and wanted. In order for that to shape their identity as a loved and wanted person. So it's not just intellectual, it's not just theoretical, it's not just, well, I know at some level that I am loved, but that has to become a part of the child's experience and feeling. Yeah, they love me. And if they love me, I am lovable. If they love me, I am worth loving. If I don't feel like they love me, I feel like I'm not lovable. I'm not worth loving. And these messages about us become the messages in us that create our long-lasting self-image and self-definition. A person who feels unloved and unwanted can eventually become a person who is dangerous to themselves, to their culture, and to future generations. A person who feels loved and wanted can eventually become a blessing to themselves, their culture, and to future generations. Who we are, however, is not limited to child-parent interactions. Who you are now is the combined interaction of several dynamic and powerful forces. And you may be thinking, what's this have to do with John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11? I'm getting there. I promise. Who you are now is a combination of the interaction of a number of different dynamic forces, influences. DNA being the first, not necessarily the most important, but the first of them. You know, DNA, you know what we're talking about. They were born that way. You know, that's the way they're wired. When we talk about somebody's DNA or wiring, we talk about something that they genetically inherited from mom and dad. Body type, hair color, eye color, emotional reactivity, intellect, creativity, emotional intelligence, which, by the way, some psychologists say is even more important than IQ in helping someone to be successful in marriage and business and in life. EQ, emotional intelligence, DNA. The second factor influencing who we are today is experiences. In the past, I used to call this circle family, but it's really much more than family. You know, the way our family operated, the way our family functioned, the rules of the family, the teaching of what how the Grogan family should act in different situations, the family learning. Because all areas of learning, including but not exclusively family, influences us. Losses, failures, successes and awards, abuse, neglect, trauma. The myriad number of things that have happened to us that have helped us shape our identity, experiences. The third circle, and by the way, if you take Psychology 101, they'll talk about the first two. They'll talk about nature and nurture. They'll talk about heredity, and they'll talk about family, learning. The third one they don't talk about so much. Choices. We make choices that shape who we are today. The choice to take our first drink of alcohol at age 14 as a dare. The choice to drive too fast on the local road. The choice to do your homework instead of going to a movie with friends. The choice to become an active and authentic Christ follower when you were 19 and feeling alone, scared, and overwhelmed instead of taking a handful of your mom's Xanax. Choices. Your choices can't cancel out DNA. If they did, I'd be a lot better looking and be able to hit a baseball better. Your choices can't cancel out DNA or life experiences, but they can minimize or increase the influence of our DNA and experiences. In other words, as a child of an alcoholic father, let's assume for a moment that I have a genetic predisposition toward alcoholism. That I make a choice to drink or not to drink. In my case, not to drink. Mm-hmm. And so whether I am truly an alcoholic or not, which I think I am, I'm never going to know if I don't make the choice to drink and find out for sure. I don't want to know that bad. Mm-hmm. I can live with that uncertainty. These influences are not the only influences, however. A greater influence, bigger influence on all that includes all three of those is our culture. With a wide range of social experiences, like education, media, the news media, celebrities, an entire range of cultural and social influences that sensitize us or desensitize us in certain areas. Martin Luther King influenced our culture. Barack Obama seeks to influence our culture. Osama bin Laden attempted to influence our culture. And because they know influences of culture also influence individual identity, self-image, personal identity. Who hasn't been more fearful since 9/11? A cultural experience that has impacted all of us. And in turn, our fears, our concerns impact the greater culture. And so it works in both directions. But as Christians, we also see that there's a bigger influential factor that we can call the cosmos. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. That's the cosmos. Bigger than our culture, bigger than us. Some of us remember singing that hymn, "This world is not my home." That's the way the hymn writer put it. We forget that the fall has not simply affected individuals, but our culture, our institutions, our organizations, our corporations, our governments are all out of sync with God's character and God's original intent for how His world should function. Because God's intent that the world should function with humaneness, harmony, and caring. The Apostle Paul said it this way: we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers in the heavenly places. All of those elements and entities that our fallen world has influenced. And so the government is not on God's side. Regardless whether it's R or D or I or whatever letter comes after the name of the politician. In the middle of all of these influences, this woman stood. We don't have a picture of this anonymous, mysterious, embarrassed woman's DNA. We don't know anything about her life experiences. We don't know if her choice of adultery was pleasure-seeking or survival-oriented. We do know that she was cast before Jesus like a rag. Her accusers gleefully wanted Jesus to join them in her humiliation, judgment, and punishment. But Jesus, always the author of the unexpected, said nothing. He bent down, he wrote something in the dust, and then he said, okay, let the one among you who is perfect cast the first stone. The one among you who's without sin. Fortunately for her, a little bit of honest self-reflection kicked in among the religious leaders, among the Pharisees, among her accusers. And they began to drift away, the oldest to the youngest. Presumably, the older were a little wiser and a little more self-aware. And when there was no one left to accuse her, except the only one qualified to do so, Jesus looked at her, and according to the King James Bible, he said, "Go and sin no more."
Mhm.
The NIV reads, "Go now and leave your life of sin." He said in effect to her, and I believe he says the same thing to us, I am not satisfied with your old identity being the right identity for you. I am not going to let the crowd define you. I am not going to let your past experiences and choices define you. I am giving you a new start with a new identity. It is who you become, not who you have been, that matters. It is not your name, your occupation, your roles, your sins, your failures, your traumas, your disappointments, even your successes and rewards that define you. Ultimately, powerfully, and permanently, you are who you are in Jesus. In the core of your being, you are not who your family, your culture, or your fallen world says you are. You are who your Maker, your Redeemer, who your divine lover says you are. You are a miracle. You are designed for a heavenly purpose. You are beloved. You are His beloved. You are His. Let Him become who He is to you, so you can become who you are to Him. Get to know this one who loves you like nobody else loves you. And you can become, by becoming His beloved and living out your life with His love in you, your life becomes transformed into greatness for His kingdom. Not according to the world. What really matters is how He sees you, how He loves you, and how He defines you.
Mhm.
That's who you are. It is who you are in Him.
I was in a class many, many years ago where we were talking about this issue. And we were told that what you are is where you were when. But see, that doesn't speak anything to God's influence.
Yes.
And thankfully, there were others in the class that pointed that out too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Who you are matters more than what you are.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you are is so closely associated with the family you were born into, the culture in which you were raised. Who you are is who you are in Christ. One other thing, and then we'll sing our last song. Who you are has to be answered in this present moment. It's now who you are. I can't say who I am is who I was. I can't say who I am is who I will be. Because who I was is past. It's prelude. Who I will be is future.
Mhm.
who I am can only be answered by who I am in this moment. As I grow and become more and more shaped by the life of Christ and shaped into the image of Christ. And so who I am is not static, it's dynamic. It's who I am in this moment, but it's not who I will be as God continues his work in my life. It does take courage to grow up and become who you really are. Let's stand and sing this song about bowing down.